They say Blue Monday is just a sad day, a psychological trick, a calendar myth. But last year, something started following me, something that wasn't sadness, wasn't in my head, and definitely wasn't human. If you've ever felt watched when you're at your lowest, you might already know what I'm talking about. Before I tell you what really followed me, subscribe. I shouldn't carry this alone. I used to think Blue Monday was just a stupid label invented for headlines and marketing, a psychological cliché to sum up the saddest day of the year. But last January, something happened that made me realize depression wasn't the only thing following me. Now, every time I hear people joke about it, I feel the cold echo of that day crawl up my spine. It didn't start like a haunting or a supernatural encounter. It started like every other morning where getting out of bed feels like dragging yourself out of a hole filled with wet cement. I remember staring at my ceiling, counting cracks I had counted 1,000 times before, trying to convince myself to move, to breathe, to exist. But something felt heavier than usual. Not emotional heaviness, but physical, as if the air in my room had thickened while I slept. When I finally forced myself to sit up, I noticed my breath misted in the air even though the heating was on. A subtle smell of damp earth lingered around me, the scent you'd expect in a forest after rain, not in a sealed apartment on the 12th floor. As I got dressed, I kept feeling like someone was standing in the corner behind me. Not visible, but present, observing, waiting for me to acknowledge them. Every time I turned, the corner remained empty but darker than the rest of the room, as if the shadows there refused to blend with the morning light. I told myself it was just exhaustion, winter fatigue, burnout, anything rational. I grabbed my bag and headed to work, walking down the familiar hallway of my building. Halfway to the elevator, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging steps that didn't match my pace, heavy enough to echo faintly through the corridor. When I spun around, expecting a neighbor, the hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered in that annoying stutter they do sometimes. But the footsteps didn't stop. They simply shifted location, sounding now on the floor above me, then the one above that. It was almost as if something was following me in vertical layers, pacing through the building's structure rather than the hallway itself. I tried to shake the sensation off as I drove to work, though the feeling of being watched sat in the back seat like an invisible passenger. Every red light made me glance at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something sitting behind me. But there was nothing except the faint fog of my breath, even though the car heater blew warm air. At the office, things didn't get better. My computer screen glitched with shadow-like distortions whenever I opened a blank document, dark smudges moving in the reflection like shapes walking behind me. But whenever I turned around, all I saw were cubicles and the dull emptiness of a Monday morning. The strangest moment came around 11 a.m. when I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. As I stared at my reflection, exhausted eyes sunken, hair messy, I noticed another shape standing behind my reflection. Blurry, tall, its outline too thin to be human, but its height unmistakable. Towering over me in the mirror even though no one stood behind me in reality. My heart clenched hard enough to hurt as I whipped around to face the empty stall, the still air, the motionless light. But when I turned back to the mirror, the shape was closer, clearer, still not fully visible but undeniably there. It was as if my reflection could see something I could not. I left the bathroom before my brain had time to argue with my instincts because every cell in my body screamed that I wasn't alone. By the time lunch came, the presence felt so close I could sense it breathing behind me, slow, steady, cold breaths brushing the back of my neck like a whisper. I realized something terrifying. Depression had always felt like a shadow following me, but this felt like a shadow that wanted to become me. It wanted to step into the hollow parts of my life and fill them, reshape them, claim them. When I went home that evening, the world outside felt wrong, quieter. The sky was bruised with heavy clouds that seemed too low, like the atmosphere itself was pressing down on the city. As I stepped into my apartment, I felt the temperature drop instantly, a stabbing cold that settled deep in my bones. The shadows in the corners stretched subtly toward me as I crossed the room, merging into a shape that barely clung to form, like smoke trying to remember how to stand upright. I felt it behind me, tall and wrong, its presence bending the air, warping the light. My depression, which usually felt like weight, shifted into something else, something external. It was like this thing had been feeding on every dark thought I ever had, growing stronger each time I whispered to myself that I didn't matter, that I wasn't worth anything. As I sat on the couch, paralyzed with fear, the room vibrated with a low hum, a sound like breath drawn through a cavity too large for lungs. Then I heard it speak not in words, not in anything human, but in a vibration that rattled my ribs. A message I felt more than heard, something like, "I've been waiting for you to notice me." I froze, terrified, unable to even blink as the shadow shape grew clearer behind me. Its form rose until it nearly grazed the ceiling, long fingers made of darkness stretching along the wall like living branches. I understood then that depression wasn't just an emotion. It was an entry point, a doorway that weakened me just enough for something else to slide through, something that needed a hollow place to live inside. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't respond. A crushing pressure pushing me down as if the shadow wanted me to stay seated, to surrender, to let it settle into the cracks of my mind. My breathing quickened until each inhale felt like sucking ice into my lungs. The shadow leaned in closer, the air around me thickening with its presence, and the more fear I felt, the bigger it grew, feeding off the panic like oxygen. In a moment of desperate clarity, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it behind me. Though the light beam cut through the darkness, the shadow didn't disappear. Instead, it recoiled slightly, hissing in a soft, low vibration before melting back into the corner like spilled ink. Still there, still watching, still waiting, but giving me just enough space to breathe again. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the shadow creeping closer, testing boundaries, slipping around the room in slow, deliberate movements. Once, around 3 a.m., I felt the mattress sink behind me as if someone lay down carefully, slowly, pressing their weight just enough to make sure I knew they were there. When I turned, paralyzed with dread, the impression remained in the blankets, the cold dip of an invisible body. The depression that normally hollowed me from the inside now felt like something sitting beside me, breathing with me, syncing its rhythm to mine until I felt its presence inside my chest, inside my thoughts, whispering doubts that weren't entirely mine. By dawn, the shadow retreated to its corner, but I knew it hadn't left. The next day, everything felt thinner, like reality itself was fraying around the edges, the air humming faintly with that same dark resonance. On Blue Monday itself, the day people mock as the saddest day of the year, I finally understood why the shadow had chosen that name. It wasn't sadness that attracted it, but resonance, a collective heaviness across millions of minds that thinned the veil between thoughts and things that feed on them. As I stood in my apartment that morning, exhausted, trembling, watching the shadow slowly rise to its full height in the corner, I felt the truth settle inside me like ice. Depression hadn't been following me all these years. Something had been following my depression. Growing with it, learning from it, waiting for the day it grew strong enough to step out of the shadows and touch me. And now that it had, I knew it would never stop following me. Not until it fully stepped into me, until my darkness became its doorway, until my body became its home. Because some people fight depression, but some of us are followed by something far hungrier. If you're still here, leave a comment. I need to know the shadow didn't follow you too.